Foundations and philosophy. What makes an empire strong? Rome, a word that conjures images of gladiators, conquering legions, and grand senate debates. But before we get to the glittering marble and the dark descents, we have to understand why it worked. What makes any great power durable? It isn't just one person, it's the structure they inherit and build. This story, like all great Roman stories, begins with the idea that the empire wasn't an accident. It was a centuries-long product of engineering, of a complex legal and military system, and of course, of remarkable, and sometimes remarkably terrible, leadership. To understand the good and the bad emperors, we have to look at the foundations. Think of an empire like a vast biological organism. It has to ingest resources, taxes, goods. It has to process them, administration, trade, and it has to defend itself, the legions. This organism is governed by a nervous system, its laws, its culture, and its communication networks, like the famous Roman roads. A good emperor is like a competent brain, coordinating these complex systems and making them work efficiently. They are not the source of the empire's strength, but the successful manager of it. Contrast that with a common mistake, the belief that one great man creates prosperity. Science and history tell us a different story. Great empires rise and fall on systemic factors: population dynamics, climate stability, technological innovation, like Rome's incredible aqueducts and concrete, and, perhaps most critically, the feedback loop of governance. When the system works, prosperity and power follow. A good emperor is the one who stabilizes and nurtures that system, rather than the one who believes themselves to be its divine, omnipotent master. So, as we explore this epic tale, keep this in mind. We are not just watching a parade of kings. We are witnessing a complex system, a mighty organism called Rome, undergoing tests. The bad emperors we will discuss didn't just fail, they corroded the very structures that made the empire strong. And the good ones didn't just rule, they built and preserved. Let's meet the guardians of the Golden Age, the emperors who understood that managing the system was the greatest art of all. The Pax Romana's peak, the reign of Trajan and Hadrian. Now we enter the Golden Hour. This is the era historians call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of relative stability and immense prosperity. It was a time when the system worked beautifully, and it was presided over by two emperors widely considered to be among the 5 good emperors. Their names were Trajan and Hadrian. Their reigns, from 98 to 138 CE, didn't just look stable. They were built on foundations we can measure. To see how good they were, you don't just look at the statues. You look at the science of Roman history. In ice cores from Greenland, for example, scientists have found evidence of global copper and lead pollution from this precise era, telling us that Roman smelting was happening on an industrial scale. This points to a massive, complex, and integrated economy, unparalleled for its time. People were making things, trading them, and the entire empire was linked. Trajan, the first of this pair, was known as the Optimus Princeps, the best of princes. He didn't just rule, he built. His legacy is one of expansive public works, from the massive Forum of Trajan in Rome to new roads and harbors across the Mediterranean. He understood that a great empire needed a robust infrastructure. This isn't just about pretty buildings, it's about connecting farmers to markets and legions to potential frontiers. This infrastructure created jobs, smoothed trade, and helped the empire become an integrated whole. He even expanded Rome to its absolute largest territorial extent. Then came Hadrian, known for his philosophy, his travels, and his love of Hellenic culture. He didn't focus on more conquest, he focused on securing what they had. His most famous monument, Hadrian's Wall in Britain, is a perfect symbol of his approach. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a complex system of forts, watchtowers, and logistics that allowed for efficient patrolling and border control. This wall represents a different type of strength, the strength of a sustainable boundary and internal security. Think of it. Under Trajan and Hadrian, you had an empire that could afford vast public infrastructure projects and maintain a professional, permanent army of hundreds of thousands. This represents a remarkably healthy and efficient feedback loop between a strong economy and a stable administration. It was a system that worked for millions, and that is what makes them good. The Golden Age's end, the reign of Marcus Aurelius. We now arrive at the end of the line, at least for this golden sequence. Meet Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors. You may know him from his writings, particularly Meditations, a deeply philosophical work full of wisdom and self-reflection. But his reign was anything but a contemplative escape. It was a period of intense pressure, a direct challenge to the systems that Trajan and Hadrian had built. What makes Marcus good is how he responded to this perfect storm. Almost from the start, his reign was plagued by disasters. Germanic tribes, including the Marcomanni and the Quadi, began probing and then invading the northern borders, which came to be known as the Marcomannic Wars. This wasn't a small border skirmish. It was a decades-long conflict that drained the imperial treasury and required immense military leadership. Marcus, a man who preferred philosophy to war, spent much of his reign on the cold, distant northern front, personally leading his legions. But the real threat wasn't the external enemy. It was a silent one. During his reign, the empire was hit by a massive, virulent pandemic, now known as the Antonine Plague. Modern science and DNA studies of ancient skeletal remains have given us glimpses into its cause, possibly a severe strain of smallpox. This wasn't just a localized outbreak. It swept through the Mediterranean, decimating the population. Scholars estimate that it might have killed between 10% and 30% of the entire Roman population, and even more in urban centers. This, more than any invading army, threatened to collapse the system. A bad emperor might have panicked, looked for a scapegoat, or fled. But Marcus Aurelius did the opposite. He was a model of steadfast leadership, using his Stoic philosophy to ground himself and his people. He was seen everywhere, personally visiting plague hospitals, selling off imperial treasures to fund the treasury, and constantly working to stabilize the state. His life was not one of imperial luxury. It was a grueling, dedicated attempt to preserve the empire he loved. He exemplifies a different kind of good. He was a manager not of expansion, but of survival. His steadfast dedication to his duties, in the face of both external invasion and an internal biological catastrophe, defined his greatness. He managed a complex system that was being pushed to its very breaking point. The seeds of ruin. Commodus, the tyrant and gladiator. Now, the decline. The system that was stabilized by Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius begins to fail, and the catalyst is a single person. This is the tragic story of Commodus, the son of the great Marcus Aurelius. This one transition, from the wisest emperor to one of the most incompetent and despotic, illustrates a key lesson. The health of a system, even a great one, is profoundly vulnerable to poor leadership. The first, and perhaps most critical mistake Commodus made, was how he ascended. The 5 good emperors weren't a biological lineage. Trajan adopted Hadrian, Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius, and so on. They were chosen for their competence and virtue. Marcus, however, broke this chain by naming his biological son, Commodus, as his successor. This established a principle of hereditary succession that for the short term proved disastrous. But Commodus's failings went far beyond nepotism. If Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher, Commodus was a performer, a tyrant obsessed with his own reflection. He loved to perform as a gladiator, not in true risky combat, but in a staged, heavily choreographed manner where he always won, fighting with blunt or wooden weapons, or executing wounded or chained adversaries. This wasn't just an eccentric hobby, it was a deep, narcissistic flaw that corroded public trust and undermined the dignity of his office. He even believed himself to be a reincarnation of Hercules. Economically and administratively, his reign was a disaster. Where previous emperors focused on stability, Commodus was reckless. He debased the currency, a key indicator of economic decline. Modern metallurgical analysis of Roman coins from this period shows a sharp drop in their silver content. This is the classic signature of an emperor who is spending more than they have, devaluing the currency, and creating a feedback loop of inflation that harms everyone, particularly the poor and the middle class. And then there was his administration. He was suspicious, paranoid, and often cruel, creating an environment of fear within his own court and among the Senate. Key advisors were executed on whims. The complex legal and administrative structures that were the nervous system of the empire were being poisoned from the inside. This is the great tragedy. Marcus Aurelius spent a lifetime preserving the empire from a perfect storm, and his son spent a decade systematically dismantling that same system through narcissism, incompetence, and a fundamental lack of understanding of what it meant to lead. The crises of 3rd century and the men who made it worse. The stability and order of the Pax Romana were gone. We have arrived at one of the darkest, most unstable, and most fascinating periods of Roman history, the crisis of the 3rd century. It was a 50-year period from roughly 235 to 284 CE, where the entire empire came close to collapsing into dozens of smaller, perpetually at-war statelets. This wasn't just a period of bad emperors, it was a period of systemic failure, fueled by some of the absolute worst leaders Rome ever knew. In this span of just 50 years, there were over 26 legitimate emperors and many more usurpers. This alone is a key indicator of absolute collapse. Power was not something that was orderly handed down. It was something to be seized, usually at the point of a sword. An emperor's life was now often measured in months, or just a few years before they were assassinated by their own Praetorian Guard or another general marching on Rome. Consider some of the specific failures. Maximinus Thrax, a general from Thrace, was a man of immense physical strength, but zero administrative skill. He was the first emperor never to set foot in Rome, and his reign was characterized by a simple strategy: to bleed the entire civilian population dry to pay for his campaigns. The Roman economy, already strained, was subjected to brutal confiscations of private property and public assets. He was, quite literally, an empire-killing organism, consuming the resource base until the host began to fail. Then there's the case of Gallienus, who reigned during a time when the empire was splitting into 3 pieces. While Gallienus himself was actually a more competent and energetic leader than many of his immediate predecessors, the fact that he presided over such a massive fracturing is the failure. Under his watch, the systemic pressures of internal rebellion, external invasion, and political instability reached a critical point. His long reign was a continuous struggle for survival, a testament to how even a focused leader could be overwhelmed by the collapse of the systems they inherit. This is the key insight into the crisis of the 3rd century. It wasn't caused by a single bad emperor, but by a feedback loop of political, economic, and military pressures that good emperors had managed and bad emperors had accelerated. The center was not holding. Rome, the vast interconnected system, was in critical condition. The architect of recovery, Diocletian's Tetrarchy. From the chaos of the 3rd century, we arrive at the next great figure, the architect of a spectacular recovery. This is not a good emperor in the sense of popularity. This is a good emperor in the sense of a brilliant, almost desperate systems restorer. His name was Diocletian, and his solution was radical. He understood that the crisis wasn't just a political problem, it was a structural one. The empire, in its current form, was too vast to be managed by one person. In 284 CE, Diocletian created a revolutionary system called the Tetrarchy, or rule of four. He recognized that the old model of one man in Rome ruling everything from Britain to Syria was fundamentally broken. His solution was to split the power, first between two main emperors, himself and his colleague Maximian, and then further by adding two junior emperors. Each of these four men had a dedicated territory to defend and administer, complete with their own capital and legions. Think of it not as a split empire, but as a management solution. It was a form of decentralization, pushing key military and administrative functions out to the very regions that needed them. This wasn't just about sharing power, it was about increasing speed and response. A rebellion in Gaul or an invasion on the Persian border could be handled by a leader who was already there, instead of waiting months for news to travel to Rome and back. His systemic reforms didn't stop there. He understood the connection between a stable economy and political power. Diocletian enacted sweeping changes. He revamped the tax system, making it more uniform and consistent. He introduced a new system of gold, silver, and bronze coinage, attempting to re-establish a stable currency and directly reverse the debasement policies of his chaotic predecessors. He also reformed the provincial and military structures. He split large provinces into smaller, more manageable units and separated military command from civilian administration, a key move to prevent powerful governors from building up their own private power bases. He was, in effect, building checks and balances into the very architecture of the state. Was Diocletian a mahbub, mehbub, well-loved emperor? Almost certainly not. His reforms, like the edict on maximum prices, a flawed attempt to curb inflation by fixing prices, often led to unintended consequences like a black market. But as a crisis manager and a structural architect, he was a genius. He saw a complex system in collapse, and through sheer willpower and a bold organizational rethink, he saved it. He stabilized the patient, and that is what makes him, on a deep level, a successful manager of Rome. The unifier and the visionary, Constantine the Great. Now we meet a truly towering figure, a man who, like Diocletian, recognized a fundamental systemic problem, but who proposed an entirely different, world-altering solution. Constantine, later known as Constantine the Great, was not just a successful general. He was a cultural, religious, and political visionary. His rise to power, in the chaotic aftermath of the Tetrarchy, would unite the empire, and his choices would alter the course of human history. His first brilliant systemic move was recognizing the potential of a long marginalized group, the Christians. Since the 1st century, Christians had been at best a small sect, and at worst, brutally persecuted scapegoats. However, by the 4th century, their numbers and, more importantly, their organizational network had grown, particularly in the economically vibrant eastern provinces. Constantine saw that their tight-knit communities, shared moral framework, and trans-empire organizational structures could be a source of unification rather than a threat. His vision was to integrate this powerful cultural force into the state. This led directly to the Edict of Milan, a policy of religious toleration that effectively legalized Christianity and, crucially, paved the way for it to become the preeminent religion of the empire. This was a profound feedback loop. By embracing a unifying belief system, Constantine helped to create a new, shared Roman identity, one that transcended local gods and philosophies, and provided a consistent, stable core for the state. His next systemic change was even more physically imposing. Constantine realized that the original center, Rome, was geographically, strategically, and economically becoming a relic. The heart of the empire was in the east, where the greatest trade routes and the most important wealthy provinces lay. His solution was to move the center of gravity. He founded a new capital, which he named Constantinopolis, Constantine's city, the new city of Constantinople. This move was a logistical and strategic masterpiece. Located on the Bosphorus Strait, Constantinople controlled the key trade routes between Europe and Asia, and between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It was virtually impregnable, with massive sea walls and a perfect harbor. This wasn't just about building a pretty new palace. It was about shifting the entire empire's focus to its most stable and prosperous core, creating a new, durable center that would last for another 1,000 years. Constantine's good leadership was about integration and relocation. He integrated a potent cultural force and relocated the political heart of the empire to its most sustainable and defensible center, fundamentally rewiring the Roman system for long-term survival. The ruin in the east, the blunder of Valens and the Goths. We must now confront a period of truly spectacular and disastrous error. While Constantine had set the empire on a new course, the systemic flaws were never far beneath the surface. This is the story of Valens, an emperor in the east, and a catastrophic decision that would, directly and indirectly, lead to the complete collapse of the western half of the empire. This is the lesson that good leadership is about more than just managing. It's about recognizing an entirely new category of challenge. The setup for this tragedy happened in 376 CE. A massive migration of Gothic peoples, including the Tervingi and Greuthungi, was arriving at the Roman border on the Danube River, fleeing the terrifying westward expansion of the Huns. These Goths were not invaders. They were refugees, a desperate, displaced population of tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands. They came to the Roman border not to destroy, but to seek asylum. When they presented themselves to Valens, the emperor in the east, he saw not an unmanageable crisis, but an opportunity. To a manager emperor, this was a logical, rational puzzle. He could accept these Goths, process them into the system, settle them on underpopulated land, and crucially, use their able-bodied men as new, highly motivated legionaries. This was, in theory, a win-win. The Goths got safety, and the empire got a new workforce and army. However, Valens's good solution was executed with criminal incompetence. The Goths were permitted to cross the river, but once inside, they were subjected to a complete breakdown of law and administration. Corrupt local Roman commanders, like Lupicinus and Maximus, saw not people, but an opportunity for exploitation. Instead of being fed and resettled, the Goths were forced into concentration camps, starved, and forced to sell their children into slavery just for food. A Roman historian famously described them having to trade a child for a dog to eat. This was a profound systems failure. The Goths, who had come in good faith, were pushed beyond their limit. They revolted, not against Rome itself, but against the inhumanity they were experiencing. This led directly to the Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, a battle where a poorly prepared Valens, full of arrogance and without waiting for proper reinforcements, was catastrophically defeated and killed. His entire eastern field army was wiped out. This one failure changed everything. It created a massive power vacuum in the east, and more critically, showed that the Goths, when united and pushed to extremes, could defeat a Roman field army. It was a failure of administration, of humanity, and of basic competence, and its echoes would destroy the Roman system from within. The Last Guardians and the Great Decay, Stilicho and Honorius. We are now witnesses to the absolute end. Following the catastrophe at Adrianople, the western half of the empire enters its terminal phase. This is not a grand, dramatic end, but a slow, painful process of decay. It's a story defined by a pairing, a capable but doomed guardian, and a hopelessly incompetent, detached emperor who presided over the final collapse of the entire Western structure. The capable man was Stilicho, a half-Vandal general who was, for all intents and purposes, the last effective guardian of the West. He was a brilliant, energetic general who understood the systemic threats and worked tirelessly to hold the center together. He campaigned against the Visigothic leader Alaric and successfully repelled multiple invasions of Germanic tribes on the Rhine frontier. He was, like Diocletian, a crisis manager, but he was managing a system that was already in full, uncontrollable collapse. And then there was his boss, Honorius, the Emperor of the West. Honorius is widely considered one of the weakest, most incompetent leaders in all of Roman history. He did not rule from Rome, nor even from a strategic forward position, but from the relative safety of the fortified coastal city of Ravenna, surrounded by marshes, obsessed not with statecraft, but with his collection of chickens. The key failing of this period was the feedback loop of paranoia and internal division. Honorius, a man of weak character, was constantly suspicious of Stilicho, a man whose competence was a direct, constant reminder of his own failures. This tension, fueled by jealous courtiers, was a systemic poison. Finally, in 408 CE, Honorius made his most disastrous choice. He ordered the assassination of Stilicho, the single man who was effectively defending the entire western border. With Stilicho gone, the defense collapsed. There was no one to coordinate the legions, no one to manage the complex alliances and threats. The feedback loop was now purely negative. External enemies, like the Visigoths under Alaric, saw that the only capable Roman defender was dead. They marched on Rome, which was now a largely ceremonial city, stripped of its defense. In 410 CE, Rome itself, the great symbol of the Eternal Empire, was sacked by the Visigoths, an event that sent shockwaves across the entire ancient world. The final end came in 476 CE, not with a great battle, but with a simple, ignominious act. The last Western emperor, a boy with the grand, echoic name Romulus Augustulus, was quietly deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. Odoacer didn't even bother to name a new emperor. He simply sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople, declaring that the Western system was defunct. The great, millennia-long organism was dead. Legacy of the Ashes, the science of why systems fall. We've seen the grand arc, the rise and the fall, the builders and the destroyers. We've witnessed the empire at its peak, and we've watched it dissolve from the inside out. But the question remains, why? And what can this story teach us? When we look back, the idea that Rome was good or bad is too simple. The real lesson isn't about good or bad people, it's about good or bad systems. The emperors were the brains, but the empire itself was a complex, self-organizing feedback loop between population, climate, trade, technology, and administration. Our best scientific tools, from ice core samples in Greenland that show ancient copper and lead levels, to dendrochronology, the study of tree ring data, which tells us of climate stability, and even modern metallurgical analysis of coinage, give us objective, physical proof of the entire Roman arc. When the coins had more silver and the pollution levels were higher, the system was integrating and expanding. When the coins became debased and the climate turned colder and more erratic, the system began to fail. The good emperors, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, and later Diocletian and Constantine, were the ones who recognized these systemic pressures. They didn't try to ignore them. They built infrastructure, secured borders, streamlined administration, and integrated new cultures to make the system more resilient. They were the ones who managed the feedback loop, creating a virtuous cycle of stability and prosperity. And the bad ones, Commodus, Maximinus Thrax, Gallienus, Valens, and finally Honorius, were the ones who failed this fundamental test. Through narcissism, paranoia, simple incompetence, or a refusal to understand the systemic interconnectedness of the state, they didn't just rule, they corroded. They debased the currency, persecuted key groups, broke public trust, and murdered their best generals, accelerating a negative feedback loop until the entire grand structure could no longer hold. The story of Roman emperors is a mirror for our own world. We, too, are part of complex, interconnected systems, from our global economy to our fragile biosphere. The lesson from Rome is not to search for a perfect divine leader. The lesson is to build, nurture, and preserve the institutions, the laws, the networks, and the shared identity that create resilience. The rise or fall of any great power is not the result of magic. It is the measurable outcome of the choices we make about the systems we inhabit. Rome's echo is a powerful reminder. The health of any state is the work of thousands, managed by a few for the benefit of all.